this morning, the American Embassy compound, under heavy and unexpected attack from pro-communist Iranians defying the orders of the Ayatollah Khomeini. The shootout lasted for 2 hours before the attackers succeeded in scaling the embassy walls. For a time, the U.S. ambassador and his staff were prisoners of the insurrectionaries. Then, forces loyal to the Ayatollah arrived on the scene, dispersed the attackers, rescued the Americans, and now remain as guardians of the U.S. Embassy. The latest and most dramatic episode in the continuing chaos in Iran is the subject of our special broadcast tonight.
This is a CBS News special report. Terror in Tehran. These reports are sponsored on a continuing basis by the makers of Super Polygrip.
Good evening. I'm Charles Collingwood. Yesterday, Ayatollah Khomeini ordered Iran's revolutionary street fighters to turn in their arms. The disorder, he said, must end. Khomeini was answered by that violent and heavily armed attack on the American embassy. Nevertheless, the successful intervention of the forces loyal to Khomeini demonstrates that he and the provisional Bazargan government have not completely lost control of the situation, despite armed groups of various persuasions roaming the streets. It is now tomorrow morning, Teheran time, and the Iranian capital is virtually cut off from the rest of the world. We've been trying to place a telephone call to CBS News correspondents Betsy Aaron and Richard Wagner without success. If it comes through while we're on the air, we'll stop wherever we are and take it. Videotapes of today's events in Tehran were made under circumstances of extreme difficulty and considerable danger to reporters and camera crews. The tapes were sent out of Iran via satellite with no assurance to the beleaguered senders that the images were being or ever would be received at this end. Indeed, during the transmission, we here in New York heard an unidentified voice say coolly, "You might like to know that this station is under attack." Included in the reports was an account of what happened at the embassy by the central figure there, Ambassador William Sullivan.
How are you feeling? Tell us what happened inside today.
Are you free?
Are you free or prisoner?
No, I'm not a prisoner. We had an attack by a group of people whom we haven't identified. They came in to my house and to other houses on the compound, ransacked them. They then attempted to attack the Chancery building here, where we all were. In the meantime, we had telephoned to the Khomeini headquarters, and General Brahimi, who is acting as a chief of security for them, produced a force of men, some of whom you see here, to come and rescue us. They beat off the attackers. They took some casualties in doing it. We're very grateful to the force that came to assist us. Now, this force, at my request, has stayed here to provide us protection this evening. We also have some mullahs who have come from Ayatollah Khomeini's committee to be conspicuously on the compound so that they too will protect us. We are not prisoners, as I said, but of course we are keenly aware that there are groups running around the city with weapons which are not under the control of this government or under the control of the Ayatollah, and who specifically wish to cause difficulties both for our government and for the Bazargan government. There are some Americans who are not yet accounted for, who have left the compound in someone's custody, and we don't quite know whether they are with the group at Ayatollah Talabani's house or whether they are still in the custody of the original attackers.
tell us how many and what kind of positions they have?
No, I really don't have a complete accounting of which ones are missing. Some of the people who are missing are not Americans. There are Iranians and other nationalities who are working here on the compound whom we haven't accounted for.
How would you describe your relations with the Khomeini regime and the United States relations here?
Well, interesting.
Mr. Ambassador, are there any plans to reduce the size of the embassy staff, particularly the Americans?
We will probably reduce after we have moved through a phase of further evacuation of other Americans in the country. We have to maintain an adequate staff here to do that before we can reduce further.
How many Americans are in this compound now?
In this compound, less than 100. I'm not quite sure how many.
Since Sullivan talked with reporters in Tehran, it's been determined that the embassy attackers were pro-communist guerrillas. There were 70 Americans on the embassy grounds at the time of the assault. 18 of them, mostly Marine Guards, were taken away. By whom, it's not certain. Late this evening, a State Department spokesman said that the 18 were being returned, apparently unharmed. We'll return in a moment with more on the terror in Tehran.
You wear dentures, so you have special worries. Food particles like this can get trapped under dentures and ouch. Now watch. Super Polygrip. It helps form an occlusive seal, a bond between your denture and gums. Helps keep food out, dentures in. That's Super Polygrip's answer to your worries. It's extra holding formula plus occlusive seal to help keep food out, dentures in. So switch to Super Polygrip.
Friend, can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
What do you think of disposable douches?
Great idea.
I think so too, though I like more solution than any of them hold.
You should try Gentle Spring.
Gentle Spring?
It's the new disposable that holds 12 ounces.
Well, that's twice as much as most of the others.
And it costs less, too. Gentle Spring helps you feel wonderfully fresh.
Sounds nice. More solution, costs less. I like new Gentle Spring.
There is increasing U.S. concern over Marxist involvement in both the Teheran embassy attack and the murder in Kabul today of the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan. This concern was reflected in an unusual State Department briefing tonight. Marvin Kalb has the details.
According to officials here, there are 40 Khomeini bodyguards inside the U.S. Embassy compound tonight, another 40 bodyguards outside. And the U.S. says it is grateful to the new regime for this help. Until Saturday, when the airports may reopen, there is no way of getting any of the 7,000 Americans still in Iran out of the country. So, the U.S. carefully compliments the Khomeini government while watching Marxist groups throughout the country challenge its authority. In this connection, U.S. officials discussed late developments in Iran and Afghanistan with the Russians. And tonight, in a highly unusual step, Acting Secretary of State Warren Christopher summoned Soviet Ambassador Dobrynin here, all but accusing Soviet advisors in Afghanistan of complicity in the assassination of U.S. Ambassador Adolph Dubs. Spokesman Harding Carter read a sharply worded critique of the advisor's role.
The acting secretary said that he was not accusing the Soviet advisors of responsibility for the ambassador's death. The refusal of the Soviet advisors on the spot to consult on this question is impossible to justify.
Dubs, a career officer, was sworn into this job last summer. Today, he was kidnapped by Islamic terrorists and killed in a shootout between them and Afghan police, who were said to be supported and directed by 4 Soviet officials. The U.S. tonight angrily demanded an explanation of their highly unorthodox role in the death of an American ambassador.
Because of its strategic location on the southern border of the Soviet Union, Iran was an important base for an American electronic surveillance of Soviet military activities. And throughout his reign, the Shah of Iran was among the biggest purchasers of sophisticated U.S. military equipment. And at the time of his fall, the Shah had amassed an arsenal which would prove or could prove invaluable to the Soviets if they got it. This has the Pentagon worried. More from Lem Tucker.
Pentagon spokesman will not say just what has become of the top-secret spy equipment used by the United States and Iran to keep watch on the Soviet Union. But there is a belief that most of it has already been destroyed or taken out of the country. As to the status of Iran's F-14 fighters and Phoenix missiles, Pentagon officials point out that those were bought from the United States. They are the property of the Iranians, and it is their responsibility to protect them. But just who the Iranians protecting them may be at this point is of some concern here. The Air Force has planes, both C-141s and even larger C-5As, standing by both here in the United States and in Europe to help get Americans out of Iran. But those planes cannot go in before the religious holidays end on Saturday, and only then if the airport is secure. And even then, Americans trying to get to the airport could have a dangerous trip since anti-Americanism is apparently running high. If and when the airport is reopened and secured, at least some Pentagon officials favor a full-scale evacuation, getting as many planes into the country as fast as possible and trying to get all the Americans who want to leave out of Iran within 36 hours.
We'll have more on the terror in Teheran in just a moment.
This country may be in danger. We could be losing something we can't afford to lose. Once in this country, when a man produced a product, it was the best he could possibly make. He stood behind it with pride. He lived a simple idea. Do it right, or don't do it at all. Nobody told him that. No government agency dictated it. And it built a standard of living for the world to aim at. Now that idea is threatened by the slipshod, the second rate. To some it means quick riches. To some, it means quick death of the standards we have built. Some are fighting this threat. Whirlpool Corporation believes in one simple idea: to continue to design, build, and service home appliances the right way, with pride, so you can live with them comfortably for years. They will not build them at all. If we can't keep this simple idea alive, then indeed we are the endangered species.
The revolution in Iran began more than a year ago. If a date is to be set as its starting point, then it was January 9th, 1978, when the Shah's police in the holy city of Qom opened fire on Muslim demonstrators loyal to the Ayatollah Khomeini. 20 were killed. From then on, it was a story of rioting, police retaliation, martial law, and more rioting. In late August 1978, Muslim extremists in Abadan set fire to a crowded movie theater, a symbol to them of the Western decadence of the Shah. 377 persons were killed. Then strikes began. The Shah's government weakened. The opposition grew ever bolder. The rest is history. We thought we'd take a look now at the way our correspondents in Tehran reported the highlights of the final 2 weeks that shook Iran and have shaken up the world.
The homecoming of Ayatollah Khomeini began with a slow walk down the steps of an Air France jumbo jet into a crowd of reporters and photographers traveling with him. As Khomeini motorcaded through downtown Tehran in a closed, small blue and white truck, his followers lined the streets by the hundreds of thousands.
The Ayatollah said if the present government, headed by Shapur Bakhtiar, does not resign, he'll call on the people to begin a holy war to bring it down.
Ayatollah Khomeini said he was forming a new government because, religiously, I am entitled to do it. The first document of the provisional regime, a flimsy sheet of loose-leaf paper, announcing the appointment of 72-year-old Mehdi Bazargan, devout Muslim, businessman, engineer, as prime minister. At a news conference, Prime Minister Shapur Bakhtiar said that indirect contacts with Khomeini's provisional regime were continuing. He asked that there be no more bloodshed, but again insisted he would not resign.
What began as just another street demonstration has erupted into a guerrilla war in the section of the city which is home for the Air Force. Air Force deserters were pouring out of their training center to join the mobs on the streets. And when the men in the Army saw that, some of them turned their guns over to civilians, and they became deserters.
After a night of fighting, Tehran showed the scars of battles Sunday morning. Police stations were burned out, the officers gone. The burned out, gutted buildings in the hands of the Ayatollah's men. But then came the move that sealed the victory for the forces of the revolution. The Army High Command ordered the regular army to return to its barracks. With the bulk of the army now either neutral or gone over to the Ayatollah, the government of incumbent Prime Minister Shapur Bakhtiar fell in just a few hours. It's believed Bakhtiar is in protective custody of the new regime.
Despite pleas from the Ayatollah Khomeini to turn in their weapons, this is a nation of armed civilians. And there is no military and there is no police force to enforce whatever law the just-born Islamic State cares to follow.
Extremist Fedayeen revolutionaries attacked the American embassy this morning. For an hour, there was constant machine gunning, tear gassing, round after round of fire. Sound trucks operated by the Ayatollah Khomeini's people screeched through the streets surrounding the Block Square compound. Their message, stop the shooting. For a short time, the gunfire continued. Then it tapered off as Khomeini people formed a human chain across the intersection to keep gun-toting, curious Iranians out of the area.
Ever since the Shah's regime began to unravel in Iran, the Carter administration, in public, has clung to the hope that what was happening wouldn't happen. A failure of intelligence, a failure of judgment at the highest levels of government, a determination not to rock a leaky boat. Whatever the reason, the president's pronouncements have seemed to lag consistently behind the events. We thought it might be useful to see and hear what Mr. Carter had to say about Iran in his last 5 news conferences.
We trust the Shah to maintain stability in Iran, to continue with the democratization process, and also to continue with the progressive change in the Iranian social and economic structure. I fully expect the Shah to maintain power in Iran and for the present problems in Iran to be resolved. We have encouraged, to the limited extent of our own ability, a public support for the Bakhtiar government, for the restoration of stability, for an end of bloodshed, and for the return of normal life in Iran. The situation in Iran now, politically speaking, is very sensitive. And I can't think of anything I could say about it that would contribute to the hopes that we have that Iran would settle their problems peacefully, that bloodshed would be prevented, and that any political change in their government would be conducted in an orderly fashion in accordance with the Iranian constitution. We hope that the differences that have divided the people of Iran for so many months can now be ended, as has been the case throughout this period. We have been in touch with those in control of the government of Iran, and we stand ready to work with them.
This country is not as rich in experts on Iran as it thought it was, or perhaps ought to be. But there are specialists on Iran, and one of them is Professor Marvin Zonis, director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Chicago. Professor Zonis, we've just seen and heard President Carter at his Monday news conference expressing the hope that we'll be able to get along with a government likely to emerge in Iran. Do the events of today encourage you to share that hope?
Well, I suppose it would be hard to use the word encouraged about any of the events of today, but insofar as they relate to our opportunities to establish good relations with the new government in Iran, I think, if anything, they're probably a positive factor, because they will indicate to the new government that the possibilities for cooperation with the United States exist, and that we aren't necessarily the enemies of their supporters. This was clearly a group out of the control of the Ayatollah Khomeini, which attacked the embassy.
Do you think that that these dissident factions are left-wing or communist or some other variety of the left?
They certainly appear to be a variety of Marxist groups on the left wing. I don't see any of them being particularly beholden to the Soviet Union. If anything, the Marxist party in Iran, the Tudeh, which is a pro-Soviet party, is the most disgraced element of the opposition. But there are a range of left-wing groups, including terrorist and guerrilla groups, which have taken part in these activities.
Doesn't the Tudeh party and the communists have considerable influence among union members in the oil fields, for instance, and elsewhere?
I think they do. I think that left-wing union strength has always been very great in the oil fields, and even Prime Minister Bozargan, who was dispatched by the Ayatollah to induce those workers to increase domestic oil production in Iran to the level where domestic needs would be met, ran into great resistance from those left-wing oil workers, and that's an important element in the resumption of Iranian oil exports to the West, even after the Ayatollah gets in charge.
How much of a challenge is this left-wing dissidence to the half-formed government of Bazargan?
It's difficult to answer, although I understand there have been some disquieting indications in the last week that the Soviet Union seems to be intent on fomenting the kind of unrest which those groups could do. For example, I understand that the Soviet Union has been buying major amounts of the Iranian currency, the rial, in Switzerland. I assume they would be buying that currency to use in order to foment domestic political unrest in Iran.
Well, will the Bazargan government be able to control the dissident guerrillas, left-wing or perhaps pro-Shah? Or are we in for a long period of tension and instability?
Well, of course, there are a number of variables which affect that possibility. One, of course, is the state of the Iranian armed forces. From what I understand, the army was so badly demoralized by the past several months that it is unlikely they could be an effective force on the side of Ayatollah Khomeini and Mehdi Bazargan against the left-wing guerrillas. That was always one of the possible ways that these groups could be brought under control. But secondly, the moral authority of Ayatollah Khomeini is so great right now that I can't but believe that he can bring it to bear through Bazargan on these groups and bring them under control. I think they will be isolated.
What about the chances of a counter-revolution or civil war?
Well, counter-revolution certainly seems to be out of the question now, given the demoralization of the armed forces, and in particular that part of the armed forces, the Imperial Guards, which might have been expected to be the last of the holdouts against the Ayatollah. It looks to me as if there are no significant forces within the country now who would try to a counter-revolution in support of the Shah.
I've got a simple test for your sewing machine. Can it wind its own bobbin? Can it make a buttonhole in one step? Does it have a memory that remembers your stitch pattern at a touch? If it doesn't, bring it to Singer. Trade it in on one that does. At Singer, we don't just have machines that do more. The money we allow you for your trade-in means they cost less.
100 million people sew easier with Singer.
It's really hard to believe that this colorless cream will let me gradually get rid of just as much gray as I want.
Grecian Formula 16, famous clear liquid and now new cream. It's colorless, easy to use as hair cream, no mess. Use a little every day. You're in complete control of just how much gray you slowly get rid of. Some of it, most of it, or all of it.
Now I use it just once a week or so. It's a cinch to keep it this way, looking perfectly natural.
Grecian Formula 16, famous liquid and now cream.
Diplomatic correspondent Marvin Kalb has had a long day at the State Department following today's dramatic events. He's still there, and I want to talk with him and with correspondent Richard Roth, who has just returned from Iran and is here with me in the studio. Marvin, is the State Department so preoccupied with the hour-to-hour situation and the security of Americans in Iran that they're unable to look into the future, or have they had time to analyze what's likely to happen next?
Charles, they are primarily concerned about the security and safety of the Americans who are still in Iran, and as we know, there are about 7,000 Americans still there. They have been able to peek beyond this problem, however, and to analyze some of the potential pitfalls. For example, while a counter-revolution may be ruled out, as Professor Zonas put it, a civil war is not ruled out here by experts. As a matter of fact, the kind of confidence that the professor puts in the Ayatollah is to a degree shared by the experts here, but not fully. In other words, there is a feeling that a genuine national revolution is taking place in Iran, and nobody is completely calling the shots. and it could be that chaos could follow upon chaos very quickly.
Dick or Richard, you've just come back from Iran. How strong and how well organized is the left-wing component of the revolution? Strong enough to paralyze the Bazargan government?
It's difficult to say, Charles. The left wing, the Tudeh party, the Marxist organizers had been at work in the oil fields, had been at work in the university, largely pamphleteering, but they had mostly been invisible. And the reason for that was that until the Bakhtiar government fell, the single common goal of the demonstrators in the streets was to destroy the regime of the Shah and his surrogate, Bakhtiar. And now the kind of chaos that Marvin describes as being feared is a result of several different groups with different goals, not all of them being the goal of an Islamic state that's wanted by Ayatollah Khomeini.
Marvin, a lot of people, including China's Vice Premier Deng, after he was out of this country, of course, have criticized the Carter administration's ineptitude in handling the Iranian crisis. Now, what could we have done?
Charles, that's very hard to answer. I really don't know what we could have done. What is clear is that the United States did not convey an impression of solidity, of firmness, of determination to move along a single track. It seems to have always been the victim of the latest bit of advice that might have come into the top officials' minds. One gets the impression of a lack of central direction and authority. The minute the oil wells stopped pumping oil, exporting oil into the Western world, one had a feeling of a degree of panic, a resigned sense of impotence, perhaps, about being able to influence the full course of events. What we're witnessing on the streets of Teheran, what we have seen tonight, is really the power of anarchy. And in a sense, when we look upon ourselves, we are seeing the weakness of strength.
Thank you very much, Richard and Marvin. Historians have long noted that revolutions tend to follow certain patterns. The target of the revolution is first overthrown. A moderate interim government takes over. It, too, is overthrown. The revolutionary forces lose the cohesion imposed by their original goal. Rival factions compete for power. Excesses are committed until one faction consolidates its authority. Iran seems to be in the midst of that process now. If it is, more terror is in store. And no one, not even the participants, can be sure tonight how Iran's revolution will finally end. This is Charles Collingwood. Good night.
I felt so miserable with my arthritis, so achy, and I promised to make my grandson's birthday cake.
Mother, we brought you some Anacin.
Oh, Anacin.
That's what I take. It has extra strength and doesn't upset my stomach. Try it.
When arthritis flares up, Anacin relieves both minor pain and so relieves its stiffness for hours.
Grandma, you're beautiful. So is Anacin.
Anacin, extra strength for minor arthritis pain and its stiffness.
This has been a CBS News special report. Terror in Tehran. This is CBS.